everyone, ready to dig into Napoleon. And we're not just talking military genius this time.
Right.
We're talking about Napoleon as like this massive historical disruptor.
Yeah.
You want to know how his rise messed with like the whole social order, specifically the Russian nobility, which is super interesting to me.
It is. Yeah, it's like trying to understand an earthquake, but
Yeah.
instead of just the epicenter, we're looking at how the tremors were felt, like miles and miles away.
I like that. That's a great way to think about it. Okay, so before we get to the earthquake, Napoleon himself, we need to know what the landscape looked like before the ground started shaking.
Yep.
So France, pre-Napoleon, not exactly the romantic picture we often imagine, right?
Not really. Think like vast farmlands instead of those Parisian cafes. And most people were tied to the land, at the mercy of the harvest. Good year, bad year, that was it.
And on top of that, you've got,
Oh, and let's not forget the feudal system.
right, that rigid social structure.
Completely rigid. Your entire life was basically determined from the moment you were born.
Yeah.
Upward mobility, forget about it.
So we've got economic instability, we've got a social structure that sounds like one good shove would make it crumble.
Ripe for change, let's just say.
Right. So no wonder people were ready for something new. But what were the ideas that were really starting to like bubble up and challenge the status quo?
Ah,
You mentioned the Enlightenment.
yes.
What was that all about and what made it so revolutionary?
Well, imagine a time when people just started questioning everything. The king, the church, the whole structure of society. Nothing was off limits. That was the essence of the Enlightenment. And it wasn't just like philosophers in ivory towers. It was about challenging the very foundation of power. John Locke, for example, he was arguing that every single person, they're born with natural rights, life, liberty, and property. Governments should be limited in their power, he said. These ideas, they were like bombshells exploding across Europe.
And those ideas weren't just abstract theories, right? I mean, you mentioned John Locke. His ideas had a huge impact on the American Revolution, didn't they?
Absolutely. It's right there in the Declaration of Independence. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Basically, pure Locke.
Wow.
Oh, and it wasn't just Locke. Voltaire was another big one. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion.
Right.
Radically dangerous ideas at the time, honestly, and people are still arguing about them today.
So these Enlightenment ideas, they weren't just staying in the salons, they were spilling out into the streets, actually causing real change. That's amazing.
It was an incredible time of intellectual ferment. And you can't really understand Napoleon without understanding that he emerged from that world. He was a product of the Enlightenment, even if he didn't always live up to his ideals.
So how does this all connect to the idea of a paradigm shift? I know we touched on that earlier.
So a paradigm shift, it's like a fundamental change in how people see the world.
Okay.
And to understand that, we need to think about our Russian nobles.
All right, let's bring them into the picture.
They're used to a certain way of life, their place in the world. It's just how things are, right?
Right.
But suddenly you have these new ideas bubbling up, whispers of revolution coming from France.
Challenging everything they thought they knew.
Exactly. The ground is shifting beneath their feet. That's the paradigm shift.
So we've got this world on the edge of change, right? Fueled by these revolutionary ideas. And then, boom, Napoleon bursts onto the scene. How does he go from ambitious young officer to, well, Napoleon?
It's really quite a story. He's rising through the ranks of the military, and it's a time of total chaos in France. Opportunity, too, of course. You got the French Revolution happening, right? That's where Napoleon really makes his mark. Military genius on full display.
Right, seizing the moment. So he's ambitious, brilliant military mind, but how does he manage to, like, completely flip the power structure on its head?
Well, he understands the power of those Enlightenment ideals we were talking about. He presents himself as, a champion of the people, a man of the revolution.
Even as he's consolidating his own power.
Exactly. A delicate dance, for sure. But he was very good at it.
Talk about a masterclass in navigating a paradigm shift, riding the wave, but also kind of directing it at the same time.
Yes. And that's when his impact, not just on France, but on all of Europe, even those Russian nobles, becomes impossible to ignore. Because he's not just conquering territory. Napoleon's implementing these huge reforms that touch every part of life.
Right. And that brings us back to the Napoleonic Code. What was so radical about it?
It's a complete overhaul of the law.
Yeah.
I mean, before this, France just had this hodgepodge of regional laws, customs. Napoleon comes in, creates a single unified legal system, applies to everyone equally. In theory, anyway.
Emphasis on in theory.
Right, of course.
Yeah.
But the big idea is meritocracy. Anyone can rise to the top based on their own talent and hard work. not just who their parents were.
I bet that didn't sit well with the old guard, those Russian nobles watching this unfold. It wasn't just about military defeats, was it? This was about their whole worldview crumbling around them.
Absolutely, their privilege, their power. Here you have this upstart, this embodiment of revolution, challenging the very foundation of their existence.
You were talking earlier about that feeling of the ground shifting beneath your feet. What was that experience actually like for the Russian nobility?
Think about it. These are people who, for generations, centuries even, their position in society, it's ordained by God, unchangeable, like the seasons. And suddenly, they're confronted with this idea that not only can power structures be challenged, but they can be completely overturned.
Wow, that's a powerful image. And it makes this whole story feel incredibly relevant to us today, don't you think? I mean, we're living through this period of massive change ourselves. Paradigm shifts everywhere you look.
Totally. New technologies, new ways of interacting with the world. It can feel pretty exciting and a little terrifying, too.
Absolutely. And just like back then, you've got people who are embracing the change and others who are, digging in their heels, trying to hold on to what was. It feels like we're all just trying to figure out where we fit into this new world that's emerging.
It is. And that's what makes studying history so important, not just for memorizing dates and battles, but for understanding how humans in the past dealt with these huge shifts and upheavals. Because the truth is, these patterns repeat themselves, even if the players in the stage look a little different.
It really is like that old saying, the only constant is change, huh?
Isn't it?
But actually living through those changes, that's a whole other story.
Oh, absolutely.
Mhm.
Knowing something's coming and actually facing it.
Yeah.
Two different things.
It's easy to feel like the world is spinning crazier by the minute.
Totally get that.
And that's what makes this whole Napoleon thing even more interesting to me.
Oh, how so?
Well, you said it yourself right. Napoleon, he represents this huge paradigm shift.
He does.
But aren't we in the middle of one right now, too?
We absolutely are.
I mean, look around. Artificial intelligence, all this tech, it's changing everything. How we work, how we connect with each other, everything.
It really is mind-blowing when you stop and think about it. Just like back in Napoleon's time,
Yeah,
you see that same mix of excitement and fear playing out.
totally. Some people are diving right in, embracing all the new stuff. Others, they're a little more hesitant.
Makes sense. It's hard to let go of what you know.
Yeah. Feels like we're all just trying to figure out our place in this new world that's forming right before our eyes.
Wow.
So with all this in mind, if we look at Napoleon as this ultimate agent of change, this disruptor, what are the real lessons here? I mean, how can we be more like those who thrived during those crazy times instead of those who got left behind?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you ask me, it all comes down to adaptability.
Adaptability.
Yeah, that willingness to learn new things, to be open to new ways of thinking. Just like those Russian nobles who were willing to kind of step outside their comfort zones and figure out how they fit into a world that was changing whether they liked it or not. We have to be open to evolving with the times.
Makes a lot of sense. I'm also struck by how important ideas were in driving all this change. It wasn't just Napoleon's armies out there winning battles. It was his ability to tap into the Enlightenment, He offered a vision for a completely different kind of society.
It's true, and that feels incredibly relevant today,
Yeah.
don't you think?
Absolutely. I mean, here we are wrestling with all these huge issues, technology, equality, the future we're building for ourselves. And the way we think about those things, the ideas we embrace, those are going to shape everything.
It really will. It's a lot of responsibility, honestly.
It is. So as we wrap up this deep dive, Napoleon, paradigm shifts, history repeating itself in some ways, here's what I keep coming back to. If history teaches us anything, it's that change is going to happen. The real question is, how are we going to face it? Are we going to get swept away, or are we going to figure out how to ride those waves and maybe even steer a little ourselves? Just something to think about.